My name is Daniel Pierce, and I never expected to find love at 14,000 feet as a professional mountaineer and outdoor guide. I'd spent most of my life pursuing summits. Rather than relationships, the mountains had always been my true love until I met Levi. It started during a specialized climbing expedition in the Colorado Rockies. I was leading a small group of experienced climbers on a challenging multi-day route up Mount Telbert. There were 5 of us, total myself, 2 regular clients I'd worked with before, and 2 new faces. Levi Foster was one of those new faces. From the moment he joined our pre-climb briefing, I noticed him tall and lean with dark hair stir with premature gray at the temples. He moved with the fluid grace of someone completely at home. In his body, his equipment was well worn, but meticulously maintained the mark of a serious climber who cared more about function than showing off. New gear I've done a few 14 Earths, he said during introductions, his voice carrying a slight northwestern accent. But nothing this technical. Looking forward to learning from you. All our eyes met briefly as he spoke, and something electric passed between us. I quickly looked away, focusing on reviewing route maps and weather forecasts. I'd learned long ago to keep things strictly professional with clients. The first day of climbing was relatively straightforward. Establishing our base camp and acclimatizing to the altitude kept the group moving at a steady pace, watching for any signs of altitude sickness or fatigue. Levi stayed in the middle of the pack, moving smoothly and efficiently, never complaining. Fate vening as we set up camp, I found myself repeatedly glancing his way. He had accurate confidence about him, helping others with their tents, sharing equipment, all while maintaining an easy conversation with the group when hellawed at someone's joke. The sound carried across the campsite, making something in my chest tighten. First time in Colorado? I asked him as we gathered there on the camping stoves for dinner. Second, he replied, accepting a bowl of hydrated stew. Did Pikes Peak last year, but this is different, more serious. What made you choose this expedition? He was skied for a moment, stirring his stew. Needed a change, I guess, going through a divorce, she said. I spent too much time in the mountains instead of at home. He gave a wry smile. Figured if the mountains were going to cost me my marriage anyway, I might as well really commit to them. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. My own relationships had always taken a backseat to my passion for climbing. It's hard to maintain a connection with someone who doesn't understand the pull off the heights, the need to challenge yourself against the raw power of nature. As the evening progressed and the temperature dropped, we all huddled closer to our small stoves. Levi ended up next to me, our shoulders occasionally brushing as we shared climbing stories. Casual contact sent sparks through each time, making it hard to concentrate on the conversation. You must have some amazing stories, he said, turning to face me fully in the fading light. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. How long have you been guiding? 10 years professionally, I replied. Started climbing when I was a kid, though. My dad was an instructor at a climbing gym. Must have been nice having someone to share with from the beginning. There was something in his voice, loneliness, maybe a regret, that made me want to reach out to offer comfort. Instead, I gripped my mug tighter and changed the subject to tomorrow's route. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect climbing conditions as we prepared for the day's ascent. I noticed Levi was having trouble with one of his carabiners. Without thinking, I moved closer to help. Here, I said, reaching for his harness. These Italian models can betray our hands. Brushed as I demonstrated the proper technique, and I felt that same electric current run through me this close. I could smell his cologne mixing with the crisp mountain air. He watched my hands intently, and I found myself speaking more softly. Than accessory like this, I murmured, clicking the mechanism. Feel the difference? Yeah, replied. Equally quiet, thanks. The moment stretched between us until Samin called my name, breaking Thespel. I stepped back, quickly took turning to address the rest of the group about our day's objectives. The climbing grew more technical as we ascended. We were roped together in 2 teams, with me leading the first group and Levi directly behind me. Every time I glanced back to check on the group, one found high size on me. Steady and intense. Around midday, we reached a particularly howling section, a Narrow ledge with a significant exposure. The wind had picked up, adding an extra element of danger. One at a time, I called back. Tuth group, watch your footing and stay clipped, and he went first, demonstrating the safest pathos. Levi followed. A sudden gust of wind caught him off balance with hesitation. I reached out, grabbing his arm and pulling him closer to the rock face. For a moment we were presaged, his breath warm against my neck. I've got you, I said softly, still holding his arm. I know, he replied, and something in his tone made my heart race. We stayed like that for a few seconds longer than necessary before continuing. The traversed evening at camp. The incident seemed to have shifted something between us. Levi sat next to me during dinner again, but this time the casual touches felt deliberate. His knee against me, his hand brushing my arm as he reached for something. After the others had retired to their tents, we stayed up ostensibly to check weather reports for the next day. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. Thank you, Levi said suddenly. Lie for earlier on the ledge, just doing my job, I replied. Foul. We both knew it was more than that. Is that all it was? He turned to face me, his expression serious, because he'd been feeling something between you and me. I'm not imagining it. My heart hammered in my chest. Levi, I'm your guide. It wouldn't be appropriate. We're both adults, he said quietly, and after this expedition you won't be my guide anymore. Before I could respond, a noise from one of the tents made us both start. The moment broken, we quickly said goodnight and retreated to our separate tents, but sleep was long in coming as I lay there thinking about the warmth in his eyes and the way my name sounded on his lips. The next day brought new challenges. We were approaching the most technical part of the climb, and I needed to stay focused, but I found my attention constantly drawn to Levi. The graceful way he moved, the concentration on his face as he tackled difficult sections, small smiles he sent my way. When our eyes met, the weather began to deteriorate as we approached our next campsite. Dark clouds gathered above and the wind carried the promise of snow. He made the decision to set up camp earlier than planned, not wanting to risk getting caught in a storm at a more exposed elevation. As we hurriedly set up our tents, the first snowflakes began to fall. Levi and I worked together to secure a guide tent, which was larger and served as our communal shelter. During bad weather, our hands kept meeting as we worked, and each touch felt charged with unspoken tension. Everyone in the guided tent, I called out as the snow intensified. We need to wait this out and discuss our options. The five of us shuttled inside, checking weather reports in our satellite devices. The storm was predicted to last through the night, but clear by morning as we discussed contingency plans. I was acutely aware of Levi sitting close beside me, our thighs pressed together in the cramped space. We need to double up in the tents tonight, I announced. The guide tent needs to stay clear for equipment and emergency use. I began assigning tent partners, my heart racing as I realized this would leave Levi and me sharing a tent. The others seemed unfazed by the arrangements, more concerned with you other and our climbing schedule as we broke for dinner, eaten inside the guide tent due to the storm. I caught Levi watching me with a slight smile. The storm grew fiercer as night fell. Wind howled around our tents and the temperature dropped significantly in our shared tent. Levi and I lay in our sleeping bags closer than we'd ever been cold. He asked softly, his voice barely audible above the wind a bit. I admitted there was a rustling sound, and then he was unzipping his sleeping bag. These are rated for extra metal, they can zip together. I knew I should refuse. It was crossing a line I'd carefully maintained throughout my guiding career, but the cold and the intimacy of the moment wore down my resistance. Soon we were coconutagers, sharing warmth. Better, he whispered. Levi, I started, but he shifted slightly, bringing his face closer to mine. I know you feel it too, Daniel, he said quietly. I see it in the way you look at me, the way you touch me when you think no one's watching in the darkness off the tent. With the storm raging outside, it felt like we were in our own private world. I could barely make out his features, but I could feel his breath in my face, sense the intensity of his gaze. I whispered even as I moved closer. It's not professional. Forget professional for a moment, he said. What do you want? Instead of answering, I closed the distance between us, pressing me lips to his. The kiss was gentle, at first tentative, but quickly deepened. A series of repressed longings surfaced. His hand came up to cut my face. Thumb stroked me cheek as our mouths moved together. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that since the first day, he confessed. We have veto, be careful, I said, though I couldn't bring myself to pull away the others. Ich no, he replied, pressing another soft kiss to my lips. But right now in Fismament, it's just us. Morning brought clear skies and a new complexity to our situation. As I emerged from the tent trying to act normal, I caught one of the other climbers, Tom, giving us an odd look. My heart rate spiked, but I forced myself to focus on the day's preparations. The snow had transformed the landscape, making the climbing more challenging but breathtakingly beautiful. Ice crystals sparkled in the early morning sun. As we began our ascent, I kept my interactions with Levi strictly professional, though every time I had to adjust his rope or check his gear, the memory of last night's kisses made my hands tremble. Looking good, everyone, I called out as we navigated a particularly tricky section. Levi watched that outcropping to your left, adjusted his position, and our eyes met briefly. The intensity of his gaze nearly made me lose my footing. Around midday, Wes stopped for a break on a relatively wide ledge. As the others ate and rested, Levi approached me under the pretense of discussing the route. I can't stop thinking about last night, he murmured, standing close enough that our shoulders brushed me. Neither, I admitted quietly, but we need to focus on the climb. I know doesn't make it any easier, though. His hand briefly touched mine, hidden from the others by our bodies. Maybe we could talk more tonight. Before I could respond, Tom approached us, asking about the afternoon's ride. I quickly stepped away, pulling out the map and forcing myself to concentrate on the technical aspects of our climb. The afternoon brought new challenges. The fresh snow had made some sections treacherously slippery, requiring extra caution. I was hyper aware of Levi behind me on the rope, knowing that his safety, all their safety, depended on my focus and judgment. We're traversing a steep section when I heard a shout. Looking back, I saw Levi struggling to maintain his footing on an icy patch. Without thinking, I moved toward him, but Tom was closer and already reaching out to help. Thanks, Levi said to Tom, regaining his balance. Our eyes met over Tom's shoulder, and I saw my own concern reflected in his gaze. That evening, setting up camp took longer than usual due to the snow. We were exhausted, but the tension between Livy and me seemed to crackle in the air. Us were gathered for dinner. I noticed Tom watching us more closely than before. After dinner, Livy and I ended up taking the first watch together, standard prosuter and thesis conditions, sitting slightly apart from tents. We could finally talk quietly. I'm not used to this, I confessed, feeling so distracted during a climb. Is that what I am, a distraction? There was a hint of hurt in his voice. No, I said quickly, risking a brief touch to his hand. You're remic more than that. That's what scares me. Intertwined our fingers, hidden in the darkness. I know this has complicated your career, your reputation. I understand all of it, but Daniel, what I feel for you, it's not something I want to walk away from when this climb is over. What are you suggesting? I don't know yet, he admitted, but I want to figure it out with you. The sincerity in his voice made my chest tight. I squeezed his hand before reluctantly letting go as we heard Simeon emerging from their tent. The next few days became an exquisite form of torture. During the day I maintained my professional demeanor, though every time I had to demonstrate a technique or kick Levi's equipment, the brief contacts felt charged with electricity. At night, we found moments to steal away together, sharing whispered conversations and tender touches in the darkness. One afternoon, as we approached the final push to the summit, we encountered a section that required careful baying. I paired everyone up, deliberately putting Levi with Tom to avoid suspicion as I watched Levi prepare to climb. Tom approached me. You know, he said quietly, been climbing with you for 3 years, Daniel. Never seen you quite like this. Mistomac clenched. Like what? Distracted Fern. He paused, watching Levi begin his ascent. Just be careful. Okay, mountains don't forgive mistakes Evan Owens made for the right reasons. Before I could respond, he moved away to spot Levi, his words haunted me for the rest of the day, making me question every decision, every interaction. That evening we made camp at our final position near the summit. Attempt the anticipation of tomorrow's climb mixed with the growing tension between Mark Levy and Tian Phoebe and me, creating an almost unbearable ishram. After dinner, I called Verioni together for a final briefing. Tomorrow's the big day, I announced, trying to keep my eyes from lingering on Levi. We'll start at first light view. Weather looks good, but at this altitude conditions can change quickly. Everyone needs to be sharp and focused. Later, during our usual evening equipment check, Levi and I found ourselves alone in the guide tent. The others were already in their sleeping bags. Exhausted from day's climb, I've been thinking, Levi said softly, checking his crampons. About what happens after this, Levi. Now hear me out. He set down his equipment and moved closer. I live in Seattle. There's amazing climbing there. Guide services always need experienced leaders. My heart raced at what he was suggesting. You're asking me to move across the country. I'm asking you talk insider it to consider us. His hand found mine in the dim light. I know it's crazy. We've only known each other for a week, but this feels right. I finished for him. It feels right. He leaned in, kissing softly. We had grown bolder with our stolen moments, though still careful to avoid detection, but this kiss felt different, full of promise and possibility. A sudden noise outside made us spring apart. Tom's voice carried throughout the tent fabric. Daniel, got Amanu coming, I called out, giving Levi's hand one final squeeze before stepping outside. Tom was standing a few feet away, his headlamp illuminating the concerned expression on his face. Listen, said without preamble, I consider you a friend, so I'm going to be direct. Whatever's going on between you and Levi, it needs to wait until after tomorrow. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. I'm not judging. Hell, I think you two might be good for each other, but tomorrow we're climbing to 14,000 feet in technical conditions. We all need you at your bed summit. Day dawned clear and brutally cold. We began our ascent in the pre-dawn darkness, headlamps creating bobbing pools of light on the snow. The air wasn't at this altitude, making every movement more demanding. I led the group with renewed focus, Tom's words from the previous night echoing in my mind. Levi was directly behind me again, but today there were no stolen glances or unnecessary cues. We were all in what climbers call the zone, that mental state where nothing exists except the mountain and the next move. The sun rose as we tacked left crux of the climb, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold. Under normal circumstances, I would have paused to let everyone appreciate the view. Today, I kept us moving, aware of Fed-dropping barometer that suggests weather changes ahead. We were about 2 hours from the summit when it happened. Levi was negotiating a tricky traverse one. A handhold he was using suddenly gave way. I heard his startled cry and spun around to see him falling, the rope going taut as his protection caught him. My heart nearly stopped, but my body reacted automatically. Years of training taking over. Hold tight, I called, already moving to assist. He had fallen about 10 feet and was now dangling against the rock face. I'm okay, he called up, though I could hear the shake in his voice just knocked the wind out of me. I supervised his recovery, talking him through the moves needed to gain the route inside. I was trembling, but outwardly I maintained my professional calm. When he was safely back on stable ground, our eyes met briefly. The fear I saw in his match my own. Everyone take 5, he announced, using the opportunity to check Levi's equipment and assess him for injuries. My hands were steady as I examined his harness and anchor points, but my voice was low and intense. You scared the hell out of me. I'm really okay, he whispered back, though I wouldn't mind if you checked me over more thoroughly later. Despite the situation, Eiffel to smile, tugging at my lips. His ability to joke told me he was truly all right, and some of my tension eased. Theorist of the ascent passed without incident, though the close call had heightened everyone's focus. When we finally reached the summit, sense of achievement was overwhelming. The view was spectacular. Endless peaks stretching to the horizon, a perfect blue sky. As was tradition, we took summit photos and shared congratulatory hugs. When Levi hugged me, it lasted a fraction longer than the others, and I felt him slip something into my pocket later as the others were preparing for the descent. I pulled out what he had given me, a small piece of paper with an address written on it below it with few words, "My door is always open, your move." The descent was arguably more dangerous than the ascent, requiring even more concentration, but my mind kept returning to that piece of paper, to the possibility it represented. By the time we reached our high camp, I had made my decision. That evening during our celebration dinner, I made an announcement to the group. "This will be my last expedition in Colorado for a while," I said, watching Levi's head snap up. "I've been offered an opportunity in the Pacific Northwest. Time for a change-off scenery." The knowing smile on Tom's face told me he understood exactly what had prompted this decision. The others expressed surprise and disappointment, but Levi remained silent, his eyes locked on mine across the flickering campfire. Later, as the celebration wound down and people began retiring to their tents, Levi and I found ourselves alone by the dying fire. The stars above were brilliant, seeming close enough to touch at this altitude. "You mean it?" he asked quietly. "About Pacific Northwest?" I did. I moved closer, our shoulders touching. "I've been thinking about making a change for a while. This just gave me the push it needed." He turned to face me, his expression serious in the firelight. "I didn't want you to feel pressured. What we have here, it could just be the mountain there, the intensity of the climb. Is that what you think it is?" "No," he said immediately. "For me, it's real, very real." I reached for his hand, no longer caring. "Ifignon saw for me too, and yes, maybe the mountain brought us together, but what I feel for you, it's not going to disappear when we get back to sea level." His smile was brighter than the stars above us.
"When do you think you might make this move? Give me a month to wrap things up here. Find someone to take over my clients." I squeezed his hand, though I might need a place to stay. "While I look for an apartment, what a coincidence." He grinned. "I happen to know someone with a spare room, a great view of Mount Rainier." The next morning we began our final descent. The dynamic between us had shifted subtly, the tension replaced by acquiescent certainty. Even Tom seemed more relaxed, though he still kept a watchful eye on us during technical sections. As we approached base camp, the reality of returning to the world below began to sink, and soon we would be back in civilization where everything was more complicated than the pure challenge of rock and ice. But somehow that didn't seem as daunting as it might have before it. The trailhead, as everyone was saying their goodbyes and exchanging contact information, Levi pulled me aside. "No, we need to keep things professional. Until you're officially done here," he said softly. "But I want you to know I'll be counting the days. So will I please just promise me one thing, anything, no more loose hand holds." He laughed, the sound carrying across the parking lot. "Deal, though I have to say my near-death experience did get you to make a move. I would have preferred a dinner invitation," he said dryly. "Oh, there will be plenty of toes." His eyes sparkled with promise, and hikes and climbs and mornings watching the sunrise over Rainier sounds perfect. A month later I stood on Mark's doorstep in Seattle, a duffel bag over Miss Hooder and my climbing gear in the trunk of my car. The door opened before I could knock, and there he was, grinning widely. "Welcome home, mountain man," he said, pulling me into a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning behind him. Through the window I could see Mount Rainier rising majestically against the sky. Its snow-capped peak reminded me of where we'd started, of the heights we'd already climbed together. But something told me our greatest adventures were still ahead, as Levi helped me bring in me gear, filling me in on all the local climbing spots. He wanted to show me I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards, whether on the mountain or in the heart